Some people don't lie to your face. They edit your reality. The bruise they leave is confusion. And confusion is easy to mistake for truth. That's why gaslighting feels so dangerous. It doesn't attack your body first. It attacks your trust in your own mind. You've felt the aftershock of it. The second guessing. The replaying. The quiet question that follows you home. Was it really that bad? Or am I overreacting? Here's what's really happening. Gaslighting is a pattern of psychological distortion that makes you doubt your memory, judgment, feelings, or perception of events. It is not ordinary disagreement, and it is not two people remembering a stressful moment differently. The difference is intention and repetition. One person is trying to move the floor beneath your feet, then watching you blame yourself for falling. They deny what happened, minimize what you felt, and rewrite the moment before you can fully hold on to it. Over time, your certainty weakens and their version starts sounding strangely easier to carry. That is the trap. The goal is not to win one argument. The goal is to make you rely on their interpretation more than your own internal signal. Watch for this. If a conversation leaves you more confused than the facts justify, confusion itself may be the clue. Healthy conflict can be painful, but it usually becomes clearer when both people care about the truth. Gaslighting does the opposite. It makes clear things feel foggy. And that early fog is often your first defensive insight. When reality suddenly feels slippery around one specific person, pause before you explain it away. Because the move most people miss comes later. Gaslighting often starts small enough to look harmless. A missing detail gets denied. A harsh comment becomes a joke. A broken promise becomes your misunderstanding. Nothing seems dramatic enough to fight, so you let each moment pass without naming it. That is how the pattern earns access. It rarely enters with a mask labeled danger. It enters dressed like miscommunication. The psychology behind it is brutally simple. Human beings need internal coherence. We want our relationships and our perceptions to make sense at the same time. When those two things collide, many people sacrifice perception first because losing connection feels more frightening. So the mind starts bargaining. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I heard it wrong. Maybe I am being too sensitive. That self-doubt temporarily reduces tension, which is why it can become a reflex. The manipulative person benefits every time you make that trade. They do not need to prove innocence if they can train you to prosecute yourself. Here's the sharper reframe. Gaslighting is not only about false statements. It is about forcing you into a permanent state of self-interrogation. And a person who is busy interrogating themselves is easier to steer. Think about an everyday example. You confront someone for a cutting remark they made in front of others. Instead of addressing the remark, they laugh and say you always twist innocent comments into attacks. Now the spotlight moves. The issue is no longer what they said. The issue becomes your tone, your sensitivity, your memory, or your stability under pressure. That pivot is one of the clearest tells. Gaslighting often replaces accountability with an investigation into your reaction. So here's how you take your power back. When the topic keeps shifting from their behavior to your perception, calmly return to the original event. Use plain language. Say what was said, what happened, and what impact it had. Do not chase every insult hiding inside the detour. Stay with the fact pattern. Another common tactic is selective memory. They remember the parts that excuse them and forget the parts that expose them. This is especially potent in close relationships because intimacy makes us expect honesty from the other side. When that expectation is exploited, the damage cuts deeper than an ordinary lie. You start wondering whether love, friendship, or loyalty requires you to doubt yourself more generously. It does not. Real closeness does not demand blindness. Real care does not grow by shrinking your reality. There's one tell that gives them away, and most people notice it too late. Their version of events changes just enough to protect them, but never enough to free you. The story always bends in the same direction. Toward their innocence. Toward your confusion. Toward your silence. That pattern matters more than any single sentence. A one-time memory gap can be human. A repeated reality shift that always benefits one person is something else entirely. At work, gaslighting can wear a polished face. A manager gives vague directions, then later insists the instructions were obvious and your mistake proves unreliability. A colleague leaves you off a message thread, then says you were informed and must have overlooked it. Because the setting looks professional, you may assume the problem is your competence instead of their distortion. That is why documentation is not paranoia. It is protection. Write down key agreements. Follow verbal conversations with brief summaries. Save timelines, messages, and changes in writing whenever possible. This is not about building a case against everyone. It is about preserving your access to reality when somebody keeps trying to blur it. Notice what gaslighting feeds on: isolation, speed, emotional overload. If you are rushed, ashamed, exhausted, or alone, it becomes harder to trust what you know. That is why manipulative conversations often arrive late, escalate suddenly, or happen where no steady witness exists. The goal is not always a dramatic collapse. Sometimes the goal is a smaller surrender. An apology you did not owe. A boundary you stop enforcing. A truth you stop repeating because defending it feels too expensive. Watch for this in dating. You mention a behavior that made you uncomfortable. They respond with charm first, confusion second, and contempt if those fail. Maybe they say you are intense. Maybe they say your past made you paranoid. Maybe they act wounded that you would even question them after everything they have done for you. Each move sends the same message underneath the surface. Your discomfort is the problem, not what created it. That message is poison. If you've caught yourself doing this, you're not alone. Tell me below. Awareness matters because gaslighting does not always come from obvious villains. Sometimes it comes from insecure people who cannot tolerate being wrong, ashamed, or seen clearly. That context may explain the behavior, but it does not make the behavior safe for you. Understanding someone is not the same as surrendering to them. Compassion without boundaries can become a doorway. And once distortion walks through that doorway, peace usually leaves with it. So what does defense look like in real time? First, slow the moment down. Gaslighting loves speed because speed weakens reflection. You do not owe instant agreement just because someone speaks with certainty. Second, separate feeling from fact without dismissing either. You can say, "I feel unsettled, and I also remember exactly what was said." That sentence protects your emotion and your observation at the same time. Third, stop arguing with blatant reality denial for too long. If someone keeps insisting the sky is not blue, more pointing will not restore their honesty. At some point, the defense is not better explanation. The defense is disengagement, distance, and documentation. Here is another everyday scenario. A family member insults you, then later claims you are cruel for bringing up old issues. Notice the sleight of hand. The original harm disappears, and your memory of it becomes the offense. That reversal trains people to stay quiet. Silence feels safer than being recast as the attacker. But silence also teaches the other person that distortion works. So here's the tactical insight. You do not need to win a distorted conversation to protect yourself from it. Sometimes your strongest move is a brief boundary. I remember it differently, and I am not continuing this conversation if my reality is being dismissed. Calm language can be powerful here. Not because it magically changes them. Because it keeps you anchored while they try to pull you into emotional quicksand. The next layer is important. Long exposure to gaslighting can produce habits that outlast the relationship or environment. You may start over-explaining harmless choices. You may ask for permission where none is needed. You may rehearse evidence before bringing up even simple concerns. That does not mean you are weak. It means your nervous system learned that being clear was once dangerous. And learned responses can be unlearned. Start with small repairs. Name one event each day exactly as you experienced it. Keep private notes after confusing conversations. Ask yourself, what do I know happened before I absorbed their version? Bring trusted outside perspective back into the room. Not from people who enjoy drama, but from people who value clarity and do not rush to label you difficult. A grounded witness can interrupt the spell, not by thinking for you, by reminding you that you are still allowed to think for yourself. Here's a reframe most people need. Gaslighting works best on people who are conscientious, empathic, and willing to reflect. In other words, some of your best qualities can be used against you if they are left unguarded. So the answer is not becoming colder. The answer is becoming more discerning about where your openness belongs. You can stay kind without giving every voice equal authority over your mind. And you can stay humble without volunteering for confusion. The aware person is not the loudest person in the room. It is the one who notices patterns before excuses bury them. It is the one who sees when apology is being harvested instead of earned. It is the one who understands that repeated confusion is not always a personal flaw. Sometimes it is feedback. Sometimes it is the alarm. And alarms are not character defects. They are information. So when someone keeps making you doubt what is obvious, stop asking only whether they meant it. Ask what the pattern is doing to your stability, your voice, and your choices. That question changes everything. Because the moment you focus on pattern over performance, the whole structure becomes easier to see. You stop grading their tone. You start measuring the cost. You stop chasing closure from the person causing the confusion. You start rebuilding trust with your own perception. That is where your power returns. Not in defeating every manipulator with perfect words, but in recognizing the game early enough that you refuse to keep playing it. And once you learn that skill, a lot of people become easier to read. Their contradictions get louder. Their pivots get slower. Their innocence starts looking rehearsed instead of convincing. Watch for this the next time a conversation leaves you strangely smaller than when it began. Pause before you defend yourself. Replay the facts. Notice who benefited from the confusion. Then protect what you know. That protection may sound quiet. It may look like a note in your phone, a shorter reply, a firmer boundary, a door you stop reopening. But quiet protection is still power. And power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply refuses to be rewritten. If this sharpens something you already suspected, stay with that instinct and keep training it. Subscribe if you want more calm, precise breakdowns that help you recognize hidden pressure before it shapes your choices. And if you want the next layer, watch the next video on subtle guilt tactics and how they quietly steal your boundaries. The more clearly you see the pattern, the less control it has over you. Stay aware. Stay steady. And keep your reality in your own hands.